Hi there everyone, Jack here again at the Vinyl Voyage. It's been a tricky week for me over the last week. Since bitterly losing out on MGK Boston's cheesecake competition, my cheesecake addiction has spiralled out of control. On the plus side, I've managed to not buy a record in March, so while I get one addiction under control, another one is just getting away from me. I don't know if the cheesecake is becoming a substitute for the records. But anyway, this is not about cheesecake addiction. It's not about record addiction. It's about being addicted to albums, certain albums. And for me, this was something that was a big part of my youth. Those albums that basically dominated your airwaves, your personal jukebox, where you just played it over and over again, whether it be record, cassette, CD, nowadays streaming. Certain albums you just can't get off the turntable, and it almost becomes like an addiction. It's the only thing you want to play. Now, I think we do this for a number of reasons. One, obviously, as we get older especially, we build up emotional attachments to certain records, and it's very comforting to go back and listen to those records and get a feeling of what it was like to be young again. However, I don't feel, as much as that might be one of the reasons, I don't feel that I do that as much anymore. Certainly not with new albums as I did when I was in my teens, because the albums, the 10 albums that I'm going to show you, predominantly these come from my younger years. Another reason, I think, is that humans are essentially lazy. We like to listen to things that we're familiar with. It means that we already know the lyrics, we become familiar with the melodies, and that kind of gives us that dopamine hit that we really get from our most adored records, our favourite records. And obviously the more we spin them, the more they become familiar. So I think there's that as well. But yeah, also when you spin a record over and over again, it becomes a part of you, it becomes a part of your personality. You know the phrase, that's my jam. For me, listening to the Stone Roses over and over and over again, like it felt like that was just like a part of my life, and it has been throughout my life. It's been a constant on my turntable, but especially around about 89 and 90, it was always getting played. So I'm not going to look at maybe some of the more obvious ones for me, like the Stone Roses or the Beatles, because the Beatles is a given. Probably most record collectors, people who are into classic rock, have really played the Beatles to death. So I won't touch on those, but let's get into some other ones. So the first one I'm going to show you is Lou Reed's Transformer. And I probably heard this for the first time. I was already familiar with the Velvet Underground. I was a fan of the Velvet Underground, but I went on holiday when I was about 15 to Lanzarote with my parents, and a friend came along, and we only had a couple of cassettes to play in our little apartment. We had like a separate room. One of them was the greatest hits of the Move, I think. We had a compilation. We had like a kind of 60s compilation, and we also had Surfer Rosa, which we played to death. But this was just non-stop. This just get played over and over and over again. And when I came back from the holiday, I bought Transformer on CD as well. And yeah, for good reason. Lou Reed's finest moment, I think, is in terms of solo albums, produced by Bowie and Mick Ronson. Mick Ronson is all over this, backing vocals and guitars and recorders and all sorts. Herbie Flowers plays bass and tuba, a load of different instruments as well. Klaus Voormann is on there in bass guitar. But yeah, what an amazing album. I think it's the songs that carry it through. Like, I think songs like Vicious, some of the more upbeat songs for me are the lesser songs on the album, which are just absolutely amazing as well. But like a song like Andy's Chest, Lou Reed's version, I think is far better than the Velvet's version. This is the definitive version, but the lyrics to Andy's Chest are just so funny. That bass line is amazing. When the drums kick in, it just takes it onto like a whole different plane. And yeah, just what an attitude, and it's just kind of summed up throughout the whole album. But I love Andy's Chest. It's like one of my favourite songs all time. Obviously, Walking the Wild Side, fantastic song. Perfect Day. But that's side two. Side two is just amazing. Makeup, Satellite of Love, New York Telephone Conversations, a bit of a silly ditty, but still amazing. Good Night Ladies. Nothing sounds like Transformer. It's just like Lou Reed. I think it is very best. And I just could not stop listening to this. It's just perfect. It's like all killer, no filler. So for good reason, it kind of dominated my airwaves for weeks. Certainly for that whole holiday, it was just played non-stop. So there we go. Lou Reed, Transformer would be one. Next up then, I'd have been probably about the same age when I heard Bob Dylan's Highway 61 revisited. And I was already familiar with Dylan. I'd heard a number of albums, greatest hits albums and Desire. My parents had John Wesley Harding. But then when I heard this was just, again, taking Dylan to another level. Can't believe this is put out in 65. Like, lyrically, this album is so far ahead of anything else that was coming out at that time. Think of like the song Wild Thing, which was originally done in 1965 by the Wild Ones. And as much as it's a great song and it's like a kind of garage rock classic, lyrically it's just absolutely nowhere near Dylan. You know, songs like Ballad of a Thin Man and just like Tom Thumb's Blues, Desolation Row, was it 11 minutes of just absolute majestic poetry at the end, done in only the way that Dylan can. It's just, yeah, a phenomenal album, and I just listened to this on repeat and absorbed every single little bit of this that I could for months and months to years, and yeah, it was just something that was never off my turntable. Righty, a little soundtrack next. An obvious one again, Easy Rider, the soundtrack from the movie from '69. I loved the movie, but the soundtrack makes the movie. I think lots of people would agree. It's a good movie, but the soundtrack's phenomenal. Like one of the first kind of rock soundtracks to a film. But yeah, Born to Be Wild's obviously brilliant. The Pusher, Smith's version of The Weight, but the big standout track for me is Wasn't Born to Follow. But when that psychedelic guitar break comes in, I don't think that there's a better bit of psychedelic guitar in any song than when it goes from that kind of country rock finger picking into that kind of phased electric guitar lead part. Is just amazing. And then you've got those like kind of silly acid folk songs like the Holy Modal Rounders, If You Want to Be a Bird, and The Fraternity of Mans, Don't Bogart Me. But yeah, then Kiri Ellis and Mardi Gras is just brilliant as well. The Electric Prunes and Gregorian chants. But yeah, again, couldn't stop playing this. I just played it over and over and over for years in my teenage years. And yeah, it was definitely one of the soundtracks to my youth. But I couldn't get that off the turntable either. Okay, the next one. So this is a bit of a strange one because I learned to play these songs on guitar from a friend prior to even hearing them. So it's a little bit strange because the band that I was in, one of the guys had a big music book. It might actually even have been my music book. Can't remember. But anyway, one of the lads in the band knew the songs and got me to play them on the guitar, and he sang along. So I actually played these songs prior to actually hearing them, and then obviously when I heard them, they just sounded a billion times better, and I became addicted to this album. And that album is Harvest by Neil Young. Just an absolutely phenomenal album, full of brilliant tracks. It sounds a bit silly to say, or maybe funny to say, but it's the drums in Harvest. I love that kick drum the whole way through. Songs like Out on the Weekend and Heart of Gold, they just sound brilliant. But then just absolutely fantastic kind of acoustic finger picking numbers like The Needle and the Damage Done. Are You Ready for the Country, Old Man? It's just, yeah, just listen to this over and over and over and over again. It's one of these albums you just never get tired of. Absolute classic. Let's see. So then after I'd left school, that would all be like high school albums. Went to university, and I think I've probably spoke about this before, but on one of my first nights in university, or at university, I went out in Freshers Week and went to this kind of 60s psych nightclub disco type thing. And I got chatting to the DJ in there, who was a guy who was at the end of his time in university. He was in his 4th year, and he was massive into US psychedelic bands. And I was into a lot of stuff like that as well, but the kind of more well-known stuff like Love and The Doors, Strawberry Alarm Clock and Country Joe and the Fish and some stuff like that. But he was into like layers below that. And after talking to him on that night, he invited me over to his flat, and he put this album on a cassette for me, and I just couldn't stop listening to it. I became obsessed with Moby Grape, this first album, which is just packed full of screamers. It's just so good. Following You, Mr. Blues, 805. There's like a kind of mixture of country rock and kind of psych rock in here, a kind of classic rock sound, but it's just an album that you never tire of. From 67, the songwriting's amazing. That kind of 3-pronged guitar attack is amazing. All the guys in the band can sing. They could all write songs. Don Stevenson there, the drummer, brilliant songwriter and singer as well. They just were a band that had it all. But this album, again, is just all killer, no filler. And because it was new to me, I just never stopped listening to it. On the other side of this cassette, he made me up this brilliant mixtape of West Coast pop art experimental band, The Seeds, the Amboy Dukes, yeah, lots of stuff like that, the Standells. So yeah, I love that cassette. I played it to death, but yeah, especially Moby Grape's debut album, absolutely amazing. Alrighty, fast forward a few years, I think this is 2006. So this album, I'm going to show, I was kind of obsessed with this when it came out, but not so much the album, it was the demos from the album, because this is the band's debut album, and the demos get leaked on Napster and LimeWire and all these downloading sites prior to the album coming out. So I get really, really familiar with all the demos. And as much as the album was brilliant, I really, really love those early demos. They're just raw and more lo-fi. But you've seen that anyway. That is Arctic Monkeys' first album. So I don't even know what it's called. I've listened to it that many times. I can't remember the name of it. Whatever people say I am, that's what I'm not. I think is that what it's called? Something like that. But yeah, I like that front cover. It's a great photo. I don't think they probably never bettered this album. I quite like the later stuff with the kind of faux lounge star crooning act that Alex Turner's kind of morphed into. But it's not as good as this. The songs aren't as good and they don't hit home as hard. The songs like When the Sun Goes Down, Mardy Bum, Riot Van, A Certain Romance, all those demos from this album were brilliant. And when I first bought this, I think in Holland, when I was living in Germany, and yeah, I was just obsessed with this album. I just played it over and over again. I loved the lyrics, I loved the raw guitar, and yeah, just fantastic, fantastic debut album, and something different as well. I think Alex Turner, I think they've been a bit hit and miss after this album. His solo EP is fantastic if you can get a hold of it. Submarine, he did it as the soundtrack. It was that soundtrack for that Richard Ayoade, what he's called, soundtrack to his movie Submarine. But yeah, this is brilliant, and I couldn't stop listening to it back in the kind of mid-noughties. Another one then from the year after, I was living in Germany, and it is Jamie T's Panic Prevention. And I was living in Dusseldorf by this time, but I was working in Mönchengladbach, and I had about a half-hour trip there and back. And I would play this every single day in the car, on the way there and the way back, for months and months and months on end. That's just really, really good. I really like Jamie T, but this is really raw. I think he was just a bass guitarist at this time. He didn't play guitar so much, but you can see his little home studio there. And I love that album cover that kind of shows his childhood bedroom with all these different influences. So obviously Ian Dury was a big influence on him. There's the Jam up here, Generation X. Some other Ian Dury influence down there. Oh, there's loads of little nods to the bands and artists that he was into. But yeah, this is really, really good. A really nice mix of kind of lo-fi punk with some electronica and little bits of rap in there. I love So Lonely Was the Ballad's a great song. Calm Down Dearest, Salvador, absolutely excellent as well. Then you've got that kind of dub influence with If You've Got the Money. Yeah, Sheila, I think, was the big hit. Yeah, another one that I could not stop playing. Jamie T's Panic Prevention. Alrighty, a few more to go. John Cale, another Velvet Undergrounder. I've had Lou Reed. Couldn't miss out on this. John Cale's Paris 1919. So I first got into John Cale when I was a teenager, and I think I heard this when I was a teenager, but it didn't stick. The album that I got into as a teenager would have been Vintage Violence, and I always kind of considered that John Cale's best album, and I didn't give enough of a listen to this. But then when I was living in Cyprus, that would have been about 2015 I first heard this, 2014, 2015. And someone had said to me, I'd had a discussion about John Cale with someone, and someone had said to me this was Cale's best album, and I'd said, not a chance, Vintage Violence is much, much better, that's the better album. And they said, oh, when did you last listen to Paris 1919? I said, oh, it was ages ago. He said to me, listen to it again, and then come back and tell me if you still think Vintage Violence was the best one. So I listened to this again, and yeah, I had to eat humble pie, because yeah, this is definitely a better album than Vintage Violence. I became addicted to that. Child's Christmas in Wales, even particularly that song, I would just play over and over again. Hanky Panky Know How, Andalusia, Graham Greene, or the whole album again is just amazing, and yeah, just a perfect singer-songwriter album. It's got that kind of classic rock sound, but at the same time, it's got that little bit of Welsh weirdness that only John Cale can deliver, but his voice just sounds a little bit different. The lyrics to the songs just are a little bit off kilter as well, like, you know, Hanky Panky Know How. Yeah, love this album, and yeah, I just played it over and over and over and over again for yeah, probably about a year. This is an album that I got into when I came back from Cyprus, moved back to Scotland, and yeah, I was looking for new things to listen to, because I kind of felt that those days of listening to albums repeatedly for months on end, it kind of maybe passed me by. I kind of find now that as a more mature, experienced music listener, I'm always kind of going down different rabbit holes. I'm always looking for the next kind of big thing or the next discovery, and I don't spend as much time as I used to on albums. And just before I show this one, I'll talk a little bit about this report that I read earlier in the week, which kind of, close that down, which kind of inspired this video. So I read this kind of study that this millennium slash Gen Z type guy had written, all to do with his music listening habits. And he said that he'd become a bit of an office drone. He commuted to work. He was a coder. He did a load of coding using this Python software. And he said that he'd listen to his playlists and then come home. And he said the thing that had become very monotonous for him was his listening habits, because he was just listening to the same album. He said, was it My Chemical Romance and Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA, just listened to it over and over again. And I found that quite strange, that younger people who have access to like every album under the sun would, you know, still listen to music on repeat. I thought it would be the opposite, where it would maybe be older listeners who would be more stuck in their ways, who would maybe listen to, you know, the albums of their youth over and over again. But on this study, so it wasn't just his kind of anecdotal evidence of this phenomenon. He kind of went in and pulled out all these different sources and looked at different reports. It was quite in depth, and I'm not going to get too deep into it, but basically his findings was that younger people nowadays seem to be stuck in a rut musically, where they have a very, very narrow kind of scope in terms of what they listen to, as compared to kind of 40 and above year olds who were a lot more open to listening to new sounds and would give new music more of a chance, which I found really, really strange. And he does back it up with lots of evidence and stuff like that. And when I think of my own listening habits, that would be the case. I do like trying new things, and I do like to try and expand my musical palette. So anyway, enough jabbering on. This is one that I get into when I get back from Cyprus. Another singer-songwriter. I've noticed a lot of these albums that I became addicted to were from singer-songwriters, but I absolutely adored this. I heard the song and watched the video for no, was it Trotka? No, it was An Epic Story. The second song on the album from Peter Perrett is How the West Was Won. The song was An Epic Story, and I love the very basic video for that, but I absolutely adored the song, and I like the story of, I like The Only Ones, and I like the story of Peter Perrett kind of coming back from his heroin addiction and teaming up with his sons to record and put out this album. And for me, this is as good as anything that he did with The Only Ones. Like, his voice is still really good, but the songwriting is just brilliant on here. And I don't think he's equalled that with the subsequent two albums that he's put out. Have not been as good. But How the West Was Won, that sounds like almost like a modern day Walking the Wild Side. The lyrics to that are just fantastic. That whole side one, An Epic Story, How to Say No, Trotka, Living in My Head, Man of Extremes. It's just a brilliant. Lots of kind of songs about salvation and his kind of love for his partner, who he kind of cites as the person who saved him from his addiction. Yeah, let's show this one on nice shiny red vinyl. But yeah, what a brilliant album. I love this album, and I think for an elder statesman like Peter Perrett to come out and put something like this out was just brilliant, and I couldn't stop listening to it. The songs, like I said, are just so strong, and yeah, it's like the right album at the right time in your life. And yeah, I just played it over and over and over again to the point where I wasn't listening to anything else. So catchy, and I think I've said before, I can understand why a lot of people might not like Peter Perrett, because his voice is maybe a little bit divisive, but I love it, and I love that album. Very quick nod to this one. This is my extra one. Vampire Weekend, their fourth album, Father of the Bride. I was desperate for a new Vampire Weekend album when this came out, and it's like a double full of great songs, massively underrated. I've shown it a few times already, but yeah, I love this album, and I couldn't stop listening to that. All the singles, one by one. So I've said that a lot of these albums, the majority of them were albums that I played to death as a teenager, and I found the older I got, that didn't happen so much. But there is one that I've been unable to get off the turntable recently, and again, that's another reason for doing this video, and made me kind of think about that. And I've shown it already, but I can't stop listening to it. It's so good. So it's Nirvana's The Story of Simon Simopath from '67, the UK Nirvana, with this kind of psych pop classic. Very childlike lyrics, but it's just the melodies are just so good. The orchestration is amazing. It's so catchy, and I love the kind of bonkers concept story around the album as well. But I can't get this off the turntable. I play it non-stop. I'm playing it in the car all the time. It's on that Fontana label. Like I said, playing it on the car on the way to work. When I get home, I'm spinning the record. I love the artwork. It's really cool. There's the band there. And then there's the bonkers, crazy story about Simon Simopath. Some other detail about the artists, Alex Spiropoulos and Patrick Campbell-Lyons, the band, produced by Chris Blackwell. But yeah, so it's rare for me to do that now, but this is the kind of last album where it's just massively dominated the turntable. Not maybe to the extent of things like Highway 61 Revisited and Transformer and things like that, where it was like I had less music then, I had less access to music, but considering the amount of records I've got now, and Spotify and all the rest of it, this has survived for a long time on the turntable, and I'm struggling to get it off because I've been enjoying it so much. So, yep, there is still albums out there that can grasp our imagination and yeah, get us into that addictive spiral of listening I'm in at the moment with Nirvana and the story of Simopath. So I hope you enjoyed my video. It's a bit long-winded. I'll see if I can cut it back a bit. And please, in the comments, tell me, what albums have you been addicted to over the years? What albums have you just played to death over and over and over again? And if you share any of the same ones as myself, like quite a lot of big ones there. I'd imagine a lot of people were really into Transformer, things like Harvest and Highway 61 Revisited. Obviously, really, really popular albums. So let me know if they've dominated your inner jukebox or your record player or your CD player or whatever as well. And until the next video, cheers for watching. I'll see you later. Bye for now.